This is The Final Word, cricket podcast with Adam Collins and Jeff Lemon. A week when there will be so much cricket to talk about, we couldn't even consider having a guest on the show. Everything is happening. The streak, the Australian women's ODI winning streak is over at 26 games. Moeen Ali is retired from Test cricket. England pulled out of Pakistan. That happened while we were recording last week, so we're coming to that a bit late. But at least the takes will not be hot; they'll be lukewarm. The county championship wrapping up, the Sheffield Shield getting started or not. Men's cricket, women's cricket, pink ball cricket, red ball cricket, white ball cricket. Rachael Heyhoe-Flint, all of these things going on, and it is on The Final Word the start of Season 11. Season 11 of the show, because it's the first week of the Australian international summer, or it has been over the last week, and that's when we switch from Northern Hemisphere to Southern Hemisphere, from Season 10 to Season 11. As the seasons pass, so they fade, and so the next lines up behind, and we have a whole big cricket season ahead for all the people who think that their cricket season's just winding down. If you're in the north, it's not over. Stay with us, and it will always be summer with us. It will always be summer in your heart. Hello, Adam.
Hello, I'm looking up at Felix's book over there. It's always summer somewhere, and that's sort of reflective of our show, isn't it? 11 seasons, so I think we worked out recently we might have made about 330-odd episodes, which means we're probably closer to 400 than we are 300 now, which is pretty cool. So yes, as you say, our naming convention is that we go from southern to northern summer, one after the next. And yes, you're right. We have too much to talk about this week to even consider having a guest with us. I note that people on YouTube, hello to you there, waving down the camera, have been critical of us not having the camera right up in our face. We just like it, like observing the podcast. This is not really about talking down the barrel of the camera as we might at the end of a day's play. This is a bit different. You're just kind of snooping in on what we're doing here, because this is principally a podcast. We're just hanging out doing our thing. So, welcome to you all. I should say. I'm not trying to say you're less important for watching on YouTube, but it's different.
You're in
medium.
the room. You're in the room. You're hanging out. I would say there have only been about 3 people who've said that, whereas many other people enjoy the fact that this is not yet another Zoom call staring down the guts of the camera, staring up at someone's nose hairs because they haven't positioned their camera very well. So it takes all types to make a world, and that is more true of YouTube than many other places.
Jeff, a couple of years ago, in 2019, during the World Cup, we had a press release lob from Cricket Australia, and you had a tremendous amount of fun with it around the Shaun Marsh music, what we dubbed the Shaun Marsh music at the time. So needless to say, when HCL Technologies have recommitted to their partnership with Cricket Australia, which was released during the week, I thought of you and your excitement at this revelation, and the wording inside the release didn't disappoint.
Well, it's not a re-signing, but it's the first thing that I can see that they've actually done, because at the time we were told this will be a big new partnership, but this is a thing. They've done a thing. And what the thing is a bit hard to understand, because the wording comes from HCL Technologies, one of the foremost producers of absolute gobbledygook in the entire world. HCL does sterling work in this area. So, yeah, I just thought I'll give this to the listeners, and I'll see if you can follow what's going on.
Should we add the Shaun Marsh music again?
Look, let's. Why not? HCL Technologies, a leading global technology company, alongside Cricket Australia as its official digital transformation partner, announced the winners of the 2021 Tech Jam, #inspired by HCL. It's a global collaboration platform to crowdsource technology-led solutions that push the boundaries of innovation. It used Azure as a platform sandbox while leveraging technology as a means to unite and encourage the passion for cricket. The winning solutions have the potential to be implemented into Cricket Australia's ecosystem, fast-tracking technology's impact on the sport. The Tech Jam demonstrates innovative digital solutions that are crucial to advancing the game of cricket for its fans, players, and community engagement.
What an absolute work of art. I mean, I've worked in comms in the past before I did this for a living. There's a consultant somewhere who has been paid probably quite a lot of money for the hashtag inspired by HCL for a total of zero people to use it, apart from HCL Technologies. And imagine you are the media flack who's had to write that release, and how many hands it's gone through before Cricket Australia, to their enormous reach. I mean, that release is going out to probably hundreds of thousands of people, and you are the comms advisor for HCL who have written those paragraphs. It's a stunning industry sometimes.
What really lands home with me is the things you can be inspired by. You know, you could be inspired by Gandhi. You could be inspired by holding your newborn child in your arms for the first time. You could be inspired by standing on a cliff and looking at the waves as they roll in. And you could be inspired by HCL. Thank God, HCL inspired me. I woke up one morning and the reason I had to go on was there. HCL Technologies. That's what inspired me.
Great to have them back. And Jeff, maybe they are inspiring the women, the England women, the Indian women, and the Australian women.
Can I jump in with one thing before this?
Please,
because I just realised when I spoke of holding a newborn child in one's arms, and we had Evelyn announced on the show a week ago, 2 weeks ago. Had a message in during the week from our listener and subscriber, Sexy Ryan Thomas, who has also had an arrival during the week. He sent us a message to say it's been an incredible week and a half, ? Time no longer has any meaning. It's been amazing so far. We're totally in love with little Teddy Thomas. Welcome, Teddy Thomas, to the world. And we hope that in 18 years or so, when we're still making this show, whether you like cricket or not, whether you're good at it or not, you have a place in a TFW 11 in the future.
Absolutely. Good on you, Ryan, and family. Little Teddy as well. What a great name. A nice note to move into the meat and drink of the show, which starts with the one-day series, the thrilling one-day series, Jeff, between Australia and India to start this series, this multi-format points series at Mackay. Jeff, because of the time difference and the other work I was doing last week, which was fairly relentless, I didn't see an awful lot of it, but I did see the highlights and catch the scores and tap into the controversy after the second game. I mean, what a perfect... I don't think we've had a multi-format point series so well poised leading into the test match. I know the test match started the series between India and England earlier this year, but if you're going to start the one days first, you want to have a fair bit of tension leading into the test, and we've got that now.
And you want to have a sense that you don't quite know which team's on top. Because this was a remarkable streak of games in that Australia absolutely clobbered them in the first one. I mean, this was sort of Mumbai 2001 areas. Steamroll them in the first match, and then India comes back and ends up breaking the streak, not in game 2, but in game 3. I mean, Australia chased 225, 1 wicket down. Just laughably easy, really. Haynes, Lanning, Healy doing all of it.
Usual suspects.
Yeah. But this second match where it's an Australian chase and it's a big Australian chase, and this was... I loved seeing Beth Mooney do what she did because, you know, we've been on the Beth Mooney train since right at the beginning when she couldn't get into the Australian team back in 2015 or so. They're 4 for 50 odd. They're chasing 265 and she makes an unbeaten 100. Coming in at number 5, not her preferred spot, likes to open, but has been down the order at 5 and then had to come in to open in the second match because Rachael Heyhoe was injured. So Mooney traditionally opens but hasn't been able to open recently, then gets thrown into the opener's spot and she's the one who bats through. 125 not out, and her fitness, her resilience to still be there at the end, you know, and to be down on her haunches, gasping for breath at times, but still able to middle the ball when she faced her next delivery, was extraordinary. The way they turned that chase around was extraordinary. Talia McGrath made her highest ever score, made 74, was it? And was attacking when it run a ball. And then Nicola Carey came in at the end and made 39 not out. at a runner ball as well, but there was so much more going on.
Yeah, we might come to the controversy at the end in a moment. Just on Beth Mooney and her story, I interviewed her during lockdown last year a couple of times actually, but one of those was about how there were points in her career when it was touch and go as to whether she was going to take the next step, partially because of her fitness. And she acknowledges this, that she wasn't fit enough to play the long innings. And I was thrilled to see this scorecard because, I can imagine how hot it must have been in Mackay, how humid it must have been as well. And there she was batting the whole way through for an unbeaten 125 and in a thrilling chase that needed them to push themselves all the way to the brink. So I think that's a nice part of this for Mooney herself, sort of seeing evidence now that she's fit as a fiddle, that she can go out and do something like this and be... I mean, she's been one of the best players in the world for a number of years, but it feels like when, I kind of jokingly said the usual suspects with Haynes, Lanning and Healy winning the first game. Well, I think Mooney deserves to be part of that conversation as well. She was player of the tournament at the T20 World Cup last year pre-COVID. So, and now doing it in 50-over cricket. We saw that innings of endurance in the final of the WBBL. I think it was 3 summers ago when she was deathly ill.
Yeah. 2 in a row. She did it 2 years running.
Yeah, and one of those she was really sick and didn't think she could play at all and ended up being a match winner. And that all comes down to fitness, doesn't it? So, yeah, what a star. I'm glad that's a bandwagon we've been on since the start because she's had a fabulous career so far and I suppose a big 6 months ahead of her with the World Cup coming up in March.
And as was pointed out to us in the Discord channel, what we had at the end of that run chase was effectively the conversation we had on the final word some months ago about situations where it would be in the fielding team's advantage to drop a catch. So the last ball of the innings that gets bowled to Nicola Carey when Australia need 3 runs to win, and she pulls it straight to square leg and gets caught. She's out, they celebrate, then the umpires check it, they send it upstairs, the third umpire says it's a no ball. That means, but the 2 players hadn't crossed, so they didn't get an extra run, but they got 1 run for the no ball. Carey faces up again, needing 2 to win at this stage, and smacks it into a gap at mid-wicket, and they run back for the second run. This is one of these interesting ones where if, I think it was Yastika Bhatia who took that catch at square leg, had she dropped that catch, but then thrown it back into the wicketkeeper and they'd only been able to run a single, the umpires probably wouldn't have sent that upstairs. It was one of those line ball, no balls where they're probably not going to check it if a player wasn't dismissed from it. But because the player was, they sent it upstairs and it was ruled a no ball, which, totally line ball decision, one that any third umpire could have made one way, could have made the other, I think, because it was above waist height when it was hit, but her back leg was parallel with the turf and her bat was well out of her crease. She was reaching out to hit that ball, and so it hadn't reached the crease line yet. So, yeah, it was one that could have gone either way, and it ended up costing him a game.
Yeah, it sort of reinforces that point we've made before, that just because television officials oversee the game doesn't mean that it's completely black and white. That's why you need really specialised television umpires to make decisions like that. It's not just a case of... it isn't like the old bit with run-outs and stumpings. Like the TV umpire's brief is far wider than that now. And you're right, you could build a case either way, but happy enough to go with what they said at the time, that it is indeed part of the game. And you mentioned Talia McGrath before. She made her international debut, I think it was during the Women's Ashes in 2017. It wasn't a bolter as such, but she was used to balance the team off and had a really important half-century in the North Sydney Test match. Great to see her back on the back of excellent domestic form last season, especially a 70 and a 3-for in that second game. Whilst the headlines go with Mooney, they couldn't have done it without McGrath as well.
Absolutely. Bowled really well, had a fair bit of shape with her bowling, picked up wickets on a pretty regular basis, and looks powerful with the bat. That 77 from 74 balls was the innings, so she was able to give it the juice while Mooney was just sort of hanging in there while they were together, and then after she got out, that was when Mooney upped the ante a bit and started playing a bit more aggressively, going over mid-on and so on. But I think, so what I said about the no ball deciding the game, it does in one sense, but also India were shocking in the field in that last 10 overs or so.
Right.
I think every delivery in the last over was a misfield. They gave away runs with misfields. Even on the very last ball, it should have been scores tied with a run out, except the throwback in was terrible. And a couple of balls before, Goswami had fumbled one at the stumps instead of getting the run out. There was also an LBW that wasn't given that should have been, where Carey was hit by one that the umpire thought was angling across and missing off stump, but it wasn't. So, there were a lot of ways that India could have won the game earlier had they been better.
Yeah, experience, isn't it? Experience playing in tight games at the end. It highlights the lack of a women's Indian Premier League, which we have been talking about forever. Will it happen? Who's to know? But I think nights like that, if they'd played more cricket in those conditions, acknowledging that, humidity and how dewy it would have been out there towards the end, but nothing can really match the experience of being in pressure situations like that. And at the moment, the Indian team just aren't exposed to that as often as they should be. So, that'll continue to bubble away in the background with a lot of people. I saw Harsha tweeting about it last night again, and he's spot on to do so. And, hopefully, regardless of how this series plays out, it might take them, there's the cynical way of looking at it and saying that had they won the T20 World Cup at the MCG last year, we'd already have one, much as it was with the men back in 2008. Or there's the more sort of open-minded view that this is inevitable. It's just about someone having the leadership capacity at the BCCI to make it so.
And if that leadership is already pushing Test cricket as they are, then it doesn't seem like too huge a jump to think that they will support this, hopefully sooner than later. I thought what was really telling, though, was in the third match, the fact that India actually had the composure to end up winning that game, because they fielded first in the third game. They'd blown the other one, 36 hours earlier. They hadn't had much time to regroup, and they were awful in the field. They bowled well, but fielded horribly, like genuinely one of the worst full game performances I've seen. So in the second game, they only fielded badly for the last 10 overs or so. In the third game, they fielded badly all day. They dropped like half a dozen catches. A couple of them were some of the easiest ones you will ever see, straight up in the air, the wicketkeeper dropping it. Shefali Verma dropped a couple, had about half a dozen misfields. It gave away runs. There were literally, I think, 6 boundaries that were given away when a player was there, got their hands down and just didn't touch the ball. Awful stuff. And I just thought, watching it at the time, they're going to fall apart in the chase here because they were rattled. Shefali was rattled. She was angry and kicking the ground and stomping around. And we saw how it messed her up in the T20 World Cup final when she dropped a catch while they were fielding. And it looked like she was so bothered by it that maybe it affected her batting. And then they come out in the run chase. And Shefali makes a 50, but completely against type, a slow 50 off about 90 balls. Yastika Bhatia at first drop is the one, she's the real find of this series. She makes 64 at a good clip and keeps them in it. And then it's Deepti Sharma and Sneh Rana who see them home with 30 and 31 they made respectively. It almost felt like they were lucky that Mitali Raj got out pretty quickly. I feel awkward saying that, but in a big run chase, she came out and was going at a strike rate of 50, as she generally does, and got out for 16. And it was like, well, now they still have time to win the game because she's not there. She's not going to keep doing that until it's too late for everybody else. So, but the fact that they saw it over the line at the end, I thought was huge after everything they'd gone through in the previous, 150 overs that they'd played.
Yeah, with Mitali, it's a bit of an outdated model. The argument being that she starts slowly and her strike rate catches up because she hits a lot of boundaries towards the end of an innings after passing 50. But if you get out in that in-between bit, it looks pretty dire. Glad Sneh Rana was involved at the end too, my favourite player from the England-India series earlier this year. I think I've told the story before, but her father passed away earlier this year. She got herself back in the team. She lost 7 kilos to get picked for India again. She led Railways, I think in Mitali's absence for a little bit in the domestic season last year. She's dedicated her return to the Indian team to her late father. She was wonderful in that test match, taking wickets and an unbeaten 80 on the final afternoon to make sure that India split the difference there. So, and also Julan Goswami hitting the winning runs. Again, I've only seen the highlights, unfortunately, for this one. But Julan bowled the last over of the second one day, didn't she? The one that that had all
bowled two no balls,
beamers.
two that slipped out of her hand.
Yeah, well, the full toss that goes above waist height plus the beamer, you can kind of, and again, all the caveats around how challenging the conditions must have been there late at night, but nonetheless, being able to do it with the bat, she's taken more wickets in one-day cricket than anyone in women's one-day cricket of all time. I think it's up towards 280 wickets, something like that now. So, and still going strong and fully committed to the World Cup next year.
And bowled better than I've seen her bowl for a couple of years, I think, like maybe 3 or 4 years. Like she bowled really well with the new ball. The second ODI, the one she got a one to cut back in that bowled Elisa Healy for nothing after Healy had bossed the first game. Like shape in, shape away, good bounce. So really looking forward to seeing how she goes in the Test match. It was Sneh Rana off McGrath with 3 boundaries that really set it up. She goes the scoop over her shoulder, the uppercut over short third, and then smacks one over mid-on. And you're like, yeah, that's your off-spinner. You're going okay.
Speaking of that Test match, which is scheduled to start later in the week, so long as it goes ahead, I mean, and we're going to talk in more depth about this later, but the Tasmanian team have left Queensland today and are playing a Shield game. Now, I know the Gold Coast isn't in one of the affected areas or one of the local government areas that have been taking action in the last 24 hours. But, I mean, we see how quickly the variant can spread, and the vaccination rates in Queensland aren't quite what they are in other parts of the country. You couldn't rule out this Test match having problems with what date it starts on Thursday, Jeff, am I right in saying?
Yeah, Thursday. Yeah.
So that's still between now and then, that's still 36 hours until they bowl the first ball. Everything crossed, because there could be wider implications with the Women's Big Bash League. I know I'm jumping ahead a bit here, Jeff, but there have been a number of players who've signed up for the WBBL from the Indian national team, which is
which
wonderful...
starts in Tasmania.
It starts in Tasmania, and that's a wonderful thing. Now, if not only the Indian recruits, but also the Australian players who are integral to the strength of the WBBL, if they can't get to Tassie, where the first 20 games are going to be played without a 14-day quarantine, I mean, that might be reason alone to move the test or to somehow reconfigure this series, because if there's any risk of them being stuck in Queensland, they'll have no choice, really. I mean, I am sympathetic. Whilst it's frustrating, I'm sympathetic to the Tasmanians getting out of there, because, well, if they don't, then they could be staring down the barrel of 14 days to get back into their home state. And that will be precisely the same for the Indian recruits. Why wouldn't they just jump on a plane and go home and sack off the WBBL in that scenario? So a few moving parts to consider here.
Or why wouldn't they all just decamp and have the test at Bellerive and do it that way? Because we've seen that basically every state that doesn't have COVID is pretty quick to close their borders to states that do. So Queensland at the moment
they won't have Bellerive, because Bellerive will have other commitments on it, but they can play it at the TCA ground, one of the most beautiful cricket grounds there in Hobart. There's a number of options when you think about it. They could play it at York Park.
Get a drop in at York Park.
York Park does host, as we know, games in the Women's Big Bash League. I'm not sure whether North Hobart Oval has...
They play it at Burnie.
Look, what about Queenstown that has the gravel? The football ground it isn't a gravel surface, but it looks like it's gravel when you're looking from the sort of helicopter shot. So, Tasmania.
Wineglass Bay. Can they play the game at Wineglass Bay? Maybe on the sand. They have a beach cricket test at Wineglass Bay.
Well, the point is, if they have to get to Tassie quickly, I'm sure there'll be a wonderful ground to host them. But the TCA ground, that's a belter. So, we're in the ideas business, Jeff. We'll see.
Well, yeah, a lot more ideas coming up. A quick word for Molly Strano, who was on as a sub and took an absolute blinder of a catch down at deep third, sprinting forward, full dive to get Stella Campbell's first wicket in one-day cricket. She debuted for Australia, Stella Campbell. So lots of nice little moments there. But yeah, interesting going into the test. Let's assume it goes ahead, because I guess everyone's in Queensland. But yeah, as you say, if you wipe out 15 of the best players in Australia from the start of the WBBL and tell them that they have to do 2 more weeks in a hotel room in order to play the Big Bash.
Fuck that.
They're probably not going to be keen to do it. They already had to do 2 weeks to get into Queensland for this series. So if they have to do 2 more to get out, they would rightly be very unimpressed, I would think. But assuming it does happen, Yastika Bhatia, a really good find at first drop. Risha Ghosh did pretty well. The wicketkeeper made a couple of significant scores. So 32 not out and 44 they're not huge on the scorecard, but they were important in matches. Meghna Singh looked really good with the new ball alongside Goswami, like outswingers. Only took one wicket, but it was pretty hard to score off. Everybody was a bit nervous because she swung the ball at a decent clip. And they were rotating their spinners, India, as well, with Rajeshwari Gaikwad, Poonam Yadav and Sneh Rana coming in and out of that team. So they've got lots of options, and it'll be interesting to see what happens with Australia because Rachael Heyhoe can't play. She's got a hamstring injury. So interesting to see how that works. Does Ash Gardner come up into the middle order and have more of an explosive influence rather than coming in late down the order as she did last time they played a test in England?
Yeah, I'd love to see that. We saw that she was sort of underutilised last time, Gardner, when she played that test match, which is a long time ago, by the way. So India have played a test this year. There might be 4 Australian debuts on Thursday, which means that, yes, Australia have more experience overall, probably, I think, maybe, possibly. But recent experience, India played very well at Bristol. So, as I said at the start of this discussion, yes, Australia lead 2-1. Maybe India should be leading 2-1, if not for that no ball. And they're going into a format of the game where they only played a couple of months ago. For Australia, it's been 2.5 years.
Word also for the Australians on their 26 wins in a row. That's going back, 3 years now, that streak.
Yeah.
An absurd streak. They got the record at 21, 22, and have made it their own by winning the next few matches beyond that as well. A pretty ridiculous achievement to clock up that sort of streak and to be able to keep it going in that game where they should have lost it and didn't.
Yeah, look, it might be one of those things that they are fortunate that it's come to an end before the World Cup, or even indeed the Women's Ashes for that matter. It's just an extra layer of, look, they still won the series 2-1. They still performed admirably throughout. Sure, they would have loved to have defended 264 in the final one day to close out the series, but they move on to the Women's Ashes one day as in February. Long time between now and then, by the way. And they won't be constantly having a conversation around this streak that goes back however many years. So, yeah, not the worst thing in the world, I think, for it to come to an end now, but to be celebrated because I doubt it'll ever be beaten. You say these things with recency bias, don't you? But there's a reason why teams don't win that many one-day internationals in a row because of the volatility of white ball cricket, which is typically a good thing. And in a way, I hope nobody can do that again because it'll mean that if anyone's going to do it, it'll actually be the Australian women. But hopefully the gap between Australia and the rest narrows rather than widen into the future.
Yeah, and that if any team does it, it will take them years to do it. So it's a massive undertaking if someone were to try to level up with that. That makes it unlikely in itself, given it takes a bit longer in women's cricket, fewer matches are played, so to have your personnel performing for that period of time, and it's easier to do it if you're a men's team back in the time when Ponting's team was doing it, playing 7-match series and that sort of thing, because you could win 3 series in a row and you'd almost be there.
Yeah, that's right. And remember, the streak started not long after that 2017 World Cup semi-final where they lost there and kind of underperformed throughout, really. They never looked the complete package in that competition. And now they can focus all their energy on winning the World Cup in March next year. So it'll be nearly 5 years between World Cups for 50-over cricket for women due to COVID. So, I'd imagine they'd far rather that be where the energy is being invested into rather than sort of talking about the streak as it extended over the last couple of series.
The Indian players going to the Big Bash that you talked about, Smriti Mandana and Deepti Sharma going to Sydney Thunder, Shefali Verma and Radha Yadav to the Sixers. This is very cheering to see because it basically shows the BCCI being more willing to play ball. There's been a little bit. Harmanpreet came and played a bit for the Sydney Thunder and so on, but we haven't seen a lot of Indian players in the Big Bash, and it feels like that's something that can only help them improve, as we've seen with the South Africans, where pretty much every South African who's ever picked up a cricket bat has played a Big Bash season or two, and it seems like that's been part of helping their cricket get up to the level where it is now. Yeah,
totally. And you're right, there have been Indian overseas players in the WBBL since season 2, I'm pretty sure it was. Was it Harmanpreet and Smriti Mandana? Might have been.
Yeah, Mandana played for the Hurricanes and Harmanpreet played for the Thunder. But it's always been pretty partial. It's been like a few games before having to go on a tour or, filling in or playing 6 games here, but it hasn't been like a bunch of the big names coming at once.
That's right. And in the absence of England players coming out, Maya Bouchier has signed to come for the Melbourne Stars. And that's because they want to get 14 games of cricket into her. It's quite a strategic thing that they are thrilled about Maya coming out to play for the Stars. Whereas a number of the England players who have been involved all summer, their busiest summer, and Lisa Cartley spoke on our coverage about this after the final one-day international, it was that, a lot of these cricketers have never had a summer quite like this. Domestic cricket at a regional level, the 100, a full multi-format series against India, and now 5 one-dayers and 3 T20 internationals in September, all the way to the back end. So they're actually knackered, and that's a good thing. It's a good thing that they've really kind of played a lot of cricket this year. Nowhere near as much cricket as men's domestic players play, or that a lot of the England 3-format players, but in relative, or in comparison rather, to what's been the case in years gone by. So that means that there may not be quite the enthusiasm to send players to Australia if they've been playing under those conditions. So they now can get there because the Pakistan series has been cancelled, by the way. Until that announcement was made last week, they couldn't have physically done the journey logistically. Now they can, and some players have considered it, and I heard a couple might still yet sign at the very last minute. There was a couple of whispers doing the rounds last week, but the prevailing attitude is that let's take a beat and let's prepare for the Women's Ashes, which start in January, and on they go. But it does open up this space for Indian imports and presumably the South Africans as well, and that's been a big part of why the WBBL has not only been a great domestic comp, but a bit of an all-stars competition across the 5 or 6 years it's been in operation now. It's not just about Australian players, but it's about the broader offering. So the Indians will absolutely add to that.
England and New Zealand women, their series wrapped up. The Kiwis did manage to win a game after we recorded last week. They crawled home in a small run chase and somehow just managed to not lose it. And then England blew them away in the last couple and ended up winning it 4-1. And all of that was happening with the backdrop of the MCC bringing in the change to the language that batsman is out, batter is the language they're going to use in the laws, which got the predictable kind of hair-tearing out response you would expect from some egregious fuckwits. But it's not like there's a law that you can't use the word. It's just that in the formal wording of the laws, they will use batter to be consistent with fielder and bowler, as plenty of people have pointed out. Why not? And I think it just helps formalise something that a lot of us have been shifting to bit by bit, but it helps lay a line that makes it easier for publications and so on to say, well, if that's the wording in the laws, then that's the wording we'll go with in future.
Yeah, my own experience with this was that early on, when I first started covering women's cricket, I was big on using batsman. And the reason being is for the same reason that the Guardian uses actor, whether it's a male or a female. They don't use actress, they use actor throughout because they feel as though the term covers both. I thought batsman did the same thing in terms of using man as humankind man rather than using man as in male. Now, my view was turned around because Mel Jones argued the counterpoint to me, and it became fairly clear that why should I be telling women how they should feel about being called batsmen? You should probably listen to women on this one, involved in the game and who have been thought leaders in the game like MJ. So I was very happy to modify my position, and I couldn't be more supportive of this. You get the old gammon and trashy old boys who go, well, batter as it is on a piece of fish. I mean, words can have more than one meaning. Surely we have the flexibility, the flexibility of thought to understand that words can mean more than one thing. So yes, batter is the thing that appears on a piece of flake when they get their fish and chips on a Friday night, as I'm sure all of these old white men do. But also, it can mean this too, and that is okay. Language evolves. And like you say, there was the predictable response, the predictable howling, from the usual quarters, and now it's all become a bit like with the Ollie Robinson thing, wasn't it? So many people who don't give a fuck about cricket day to day suddenly had a very strong view about a player who was going to be cancelled out of cricket. The woke culture, meaning Ollie Robinson will never play again. Ollie Robinson missed one test match. He played every test of the India series. They went through a formal process, and it ended up with a perfectly reasonable, balanced outcome. And it's this. And funnily enough, it's the same people, it's the same crew who are having a conniption over this. So We all know who they are. We all know what they are. We all know what they represent. It doesn't matter in the slightest. And as I think George Tabell said on Twitter, if this means that the game is a little bit more inclusive to young girls coming through, does it make a lick of difference? Of course it doesn't. It can only be there's no possible negative repercussions from this. The only repercussions are potentially having more girls deciding to play cricket because they feel it's more a sport for them. Fair play. Green light it. No big deal. And the MCC, we often, Jeff, we had a conversation briefly about the MCC last week. It's easy to point at them as a bastion of old English aristocratic values. Well, they've shown themselves to be quite a progressive, modern organisation in the last decade or so. Not least the fact that Claire Connor takes over as the president this week, the first woman to lead that organisation in 250 years. It's a small but important step, as is this. It symbolises where the game's going, not where the game's been.
Mm-hmm. Yep. There is an entire extensive genre of humour that people may be familiar with that involves puns, which are instances where a word means two things, and you have the usage of one meaning when it actually should have the usage of another, and that is considered humorous. Yes, words can mean more than one thing, and that is okay.
Before we move off the England-New Zealand series, you're right in saying that New Zealand did win the third. Just a couple of points from that. Molly Penfold's a likely type. She took 2 wickets on debut, bowled more quickly than anybody in the series. She's 20 years of age. She's played about 10 domestic games, and they've picked her on sort of raw talent at 20 years of age, and she's one to watch into the future. Leah Tahuhu taking 5 for 37, I think it was, career best figures to set up that Leicester win, and I suppose it gave England plenty to think about and work on in the final 2 games, and they had their highest successful run chase in the 4th game, so I think they hauled down about 250 odd, something like that. That was a Heather Knight century, her second ton in 50 over cricket for England. And as Vish said during the week, she's quietly becoming a great of England cricket, isn't she? World Cup captain winner in 2017, the only England player to have a century in all 3 formats of the game. The consistency of her output over the last decade or so, and she's still only 30, and she'll be the captain leading into that World Cup next March. And then in the 5th game, they go and smack 347, their highest score since the 2017 World Cup. Jeff, I think I'd be right in saying, where they laid the foundation in that way that we became so familiar with in that tournament. Beaumont runs up the top. Her second century at home, where she plays at Canterbury, 8th for England. They've all come since 2016. She's a tour de force. And then supported by 2 players who I thought might be vying for one spot in Danny Wyatt and Sophia Dunkley. I thought maybe there'll be room for a finisher, then Catherine Brunt at 7. Well, if you've got the hitting ability of Wyatt, and what we've seen since she's been recalled to the team for the second one day, she was exceptional. And then Sophia Dunkley, who's had a wonderful summer overall between the 100 and the India series and finishing it well down at Kent. Maybe they'll have to find room for both of them. And that's a pretty good problem for them to have. And even Amy Jones, who had a pretty rough summer, made 60 in the final one day. The one spot that's probably available is that of Lauren Winfield-Hill, who got dropped 4 times on the way to 40-odd, hasn't made a half century in 5 years. And as for New Zealand, I mean, Jeff, they had a stinker in the final game. I reckon Brooke Halliday probably is a player to, for the future. I think they should open with her at the World Cup. I think, left-hand, right-hand, they'll give them a bit more flexibility. And then as for Susie Bates, Sophie Devine and Amy Satterthwaite, they all had their say at different points during the series, the big 3, but they're still too reliant on one of the 3 of them being match-winning. Otherwise, it feels difficult to see how they get to the semi-finals of their home World Cup.
The Rachael Heyhoe-Flint final, I've always thought, rather than the Australians, they give Rachel Haynes the nickname of Desi, as in Desmond Haynes. I think they should call her Rachael Heyhoe-Flint. That would be more
Flinty.
More
Flinty.
Oh, Flinty. Yep, Southern Vipers won that in a replay of the final last year against the Diamonds. The final bit of action in women's domestic cricket in England for their season.
Huge summer for domestic women's cricket with the Heyhoe-Flint, with the Charlotte Edwards Cup, with the 100, all the international cricket we mentioned before. Bit of a thriller in the end. Not the highest quality game I've seen this year, in that there were some massive collapses and some pretty poor dismissals. The Diamonds were 116 for 8 at one stage, and I'm thinking, well, I'm on an early train here. But no, it didn't quite work out that way. Georgia Adams took 4 for and Charlotte Taylor 2 for with their kind of slow off spin. But then Amy Campbell recovered it for the Diamonds. They set 184. And then in reply, Beth Langston, Jeff, who was an England player a couple of years ago, bowled Georgia Adams with one of the best balls you'll see, bending back her off stump in the first over. There was another collapse from Jenny Gunn, playing her 316th list day game across 20 years. That might be her farewell, who's to know. But she took 3 for, including 2 in 2 balls, which left the Vipers 109 for 7. And then I think one of the best parts of the final was that it was Emily Windsor walking out at about 5 or 6. I mean, she's not a professional. Remember, there's 41 pros at domestic level and 17 from the national team. There are still about half of these teams with effectively amateurs who are having day jobs. In the case of Emily, she's a physiotherapist. She's been doing some commentary for Test Match Special this summer as well. And she made, she was about 20 off 70 odd. And then she found a partner in Tara Norris, who'd only faced 16 balls this season. Norris made 40, Windsor made 47 not out, an unbeaten 83 run stand, a thrilling finish. They won with a couple of balls to spare by 3 wickets, and Windsor was the player of the match. And Charlotte Edwards, yet again, the Victoria's coach. She's got a bit of the Midas touch, Lottie. And she's off to the BBL today, actually. She's flying this morning to Adelaide for quarantine and then off to coach with the Strikers as she has for the last couple of years. So, yeah, it was a really good end to the season, an exciting final, and, a good host in Northants.
Very good. I think it's time for a game. Is it time for a game?
I think it might be.
A little bit of Nerd Pledge. Nerd Pledge. No, I'm not playing music. The Zoom call just asked if I was playing a song. I'm not. Nerd Pledge. It's a game that we play with people on our Patreon page. We need to fund the show, and so they help us do that by sending contributions. But the contributions are not normal round amounts of currency. They're amounts that relate to cricket in some way, and we have to work out what it is. Before we get to our Nerd Pledge number for this week, we should mention that sometimes when we get a number wrong, then people write back to us. We do a segment on the show called Revisits. Adam had a live revisit at a cricket ground at Canterbury during the week when he was bailed up by James Philbrook, who came out of the stands and said, "You just did my number on the show this week."
Yeah, he'd listened.
Get it right.
He'd listened to the podcast on the way to Canterbury to watch the last one dayer, and his number was 275. And I think the clue was Canterbury or something like that. And the fact that we were at Canterbury drew it all together quite well. But yeah, I think he went. Did you do Durramane's batting average this year or something?
No, his career average, now that he's added like 5 runs to it, having been really good this year, knowing that he's one of your particular favourites. I thought I'd put him in the show. No,
that was nice of you. But no, he was saying to me, he was insisting that I needed to look at what I was seeing in front of me. And I just couldn't see what he was talking about. We left it with, it's a partnership worth 275. And I didn't clock that the original clue was to do with Canterbury. If I did, I would have pieced it together then and there that Tammy Beaumont, Canterbury's own, well, Kent's own, she's not from Canterbury specifically, but that's where the Kent club's based. She put on 275 with Sarah Taylor in the 17 World Cup against South Africa when they made that gigantic score of 373 for 5. And the South Africans did a decent job in chasing it. They made 305 for 9. But yeah, there was a record 378 runs made that day at Bristol, which beat the previous record by over 100 runs. So, and yeah, the 275 partnership between Tammy and Sarah Taylor is the highest ever for any wicket in one day, as I'm pretty sure, and I think maybe the highest partnership in one day history, something like that. But he was insisting on looking at it in front of me.
Is that in women's one days? Or
yeah. I think that there've been men's partnerships that have been higher than that, but that's the highest.
There's one of 3. There's Imam ul Haq and Fakhar Zaman put on 300 plus.
In Zimbabwe,
in Zimbabwe.
Yeah, I think we dealt with that a couple of weeks ago, didn't we? So yeah, that's the standard now for women's one day internationals. And the reason he was insisting that I looked at in front of me was that Tammy was on her way to a century at the time, which was a nice way to bring it all back. So thanks, James. Consider your revisit done.
But the new number that comes in this week is from Philip Meng. The father of Nerd Pledge. the guy who accidentally came up with the concept by sending us, instead of sending us $2 way back in the day, he sent us $2.22. And we said that's a joke about Richie Benno, and we mentioned it on the show. And then other people started sending us boutique numbers. And eventually it turned into a segment, and then it turned into an entire program of its own. All of this you're responsible for, Philip Ming. And the number that he sent through this time is $3.34. Now, I'm going to say that we could go with the career batting average of 90s all-rounder Mike Watkinson after his 4 tests, who averaged 33.4. But having given this one to Adam, I am suspecting he's more likely to go with DG Bradman 334 at Leeds.
That's a thoroughly ridiculous test match, by the way. It's not just Bradman. It's the fact that there's 1,601 runs made I think it's in a 4-day test match. Australia conceding 425 and 375, so 800 runs. And they still won by 7 wickets. And, that was largely because they made about 900 or something like that. Anyway, so they go to Leeds, they bat first, and Archie Jackson's out almost immediately. So Bradman walks out at the fall of the first wicket, scores 2 for 1. By lunch, he's 105, not out. He's only the third player to get a century in the first session of a test after Charlie McCartney and Trumper. He's got to a century in 99 minutes, and he's reached that mark by 10 to 1. Second session brings up his 200 in 214 minutes. It wasn't long before he passed 223, which was the highest score made against England to that time. That was by George Headley the previous year. So it gives you, I suppose, a bit of a sense that these gigantic numbers were, they're big by today's standards, but by 1930 standards, they were just astronomical. They were out of control. People didn't do this kind of thing. Nor did they go on and bring up a 300 in the space of 316 minutes. By that point, his own highest score of the previous week at Lords had been overtaken. The Ashes record of Tip Foster, his 287 from Sydney on debut, was gone as well. By the close of play, he'd made 309 runs in the day. Still nobody has made more runs in a single day than that in 1930. The final run of that day gave him 2,000 for the tour by that point. Neville Cardis wrote, from the last ball of that day, Bradman, by a superb cover drive, a stroke handsome enough for any batsman who's ever done the honour to cricket, hit his 42nd boundary. That was a royal way to finish a day, which Australia will not forget as long as the game is played and loved there. And true enough, so it goes nearly a century later. He came back the next morning to finish the job, knocking off Andy Sandham's 325, which was the world record from a couple of months earlier, the first 100 in Test cricket. And finally, Tate did get him for 334, caught from his 383rd delivery in the middle. They drew that Test match. England were following on. It was a 4-day Test. They ran out of time, as they did at Manchester the following week. So it was all to play for at the Oval, with the series tied at 1 apiece. And predictably, Bradman made another double ton, 232. To take Australia to 695, and they won that test by an innings. He would make another 100 at Leeds in 1934, 304. His overall record in first-class cricket at Headingley was 963 runs at an average of 193. For the series, of course, he made 974 runs at 140 in just 7 innings. And he finished the summer with 2,960 runs at an average of 99, with a 236, a 185, a 252, a 191, a 254, a 232, a 205, and of course the 334, which stood for the longest time as the Australian record, and still goes down as one of the most spectacular days, if not the most spectacular day in the history of Australian cricket.
Thank you, Adam, and thank you, Philip Ming, for sending in a Nerd Pledge. If you want to play Nerd Pledge, you just go to patreon.com/thefinalword. You put in your number, you choose how often you want to send it. It's all in your control, and then your number goes on the list. It will come around on the show, and you stand a very good chance of being able to give away a slab of delicious Brick Lane beer to someone in Australia who you like. It could be you could give it to yourself, you could give it to someone else, and Philip Meng will get to do that because he will be sent the honorary case of 24 delicious Brick Lane products. Brendan Crabb, former winner during the week, sent us through some artistic photographs of himself enjoying a Brick Lane, and the good news that came in over the last week or so as well is that the dark ale, the porter that Brick Lane made, just won an award, the world's best porter at the World Beer Awards.
The Revolver.
Don't get any more global than that.
It's called the Revolver, isn't it?
Yeah. It is
the 2 in the
Steve
morning.
O'Keefe special.
Yeah, well, the Andrew O'Keefe special Revolver, wasn't it? Crawling out in the gutter at 3 in the morning, just waiting for a mate.
Just waiting for a mate. Glow sticks. Do you know who I am? I'm Shannon Knoll. Yes. Now, listen to this as things that are flavours that you might get in this beer. A midnight black beer with restrained roasty characters and a velvety body. It bursts with unexpected bright hop aromas of candied pineapple, peach, pine resin, and hoppy floral notes, as well as rich flavours of toasted chocolate, espresso martini, and a spicy bitter finish. That's every flavour I've ever heard of. They're all in this one beer. It's literally a taste explosion.
And one more thing I'll add, Jeff, before we move on from Brick Lane, is that we are going to have a new discount code, which we're going to launch on Storytime this week, which will get you... I say that. I mean, I hope we launch. I'm just going to back us in. We will get the job done before Storytime is recorded in a couple of days, which will open up Brick Lane, if you just want to buy it, by saying you're a pal of the final word. There'll be an offer code or something like that, which will add to the relationship we've already got. I love seeing that photo from Brendan during the week, and I love having the final word linked in with Brick Lane, who are good people doing good things.
Patreon.com/thefinalword. Nerd plan.
Oh, yes, and follow them on all the socials as well. Okay, Jeff, it's time for our mid-show break. When we return, we'll be talking about Pakistan. We'll be talking about Moeen Ali. We'll be talking about the Ashes. We'll be talking about quarantine facilities. We'll be talking about the Bob Willis Trophy final. We'll be talking about the County Championship. We'll be talking about the Sheffield Shield and the IPL, just that little thing called the Indian Premier League. There's quite a bit going on this week on The Final Word. It's a magazine. It's the best in the cricketing world. It's called Wisden, Cricket Monthly. I have the copy in my hand right now. I'm showing it to the camera if you're watching on YouTube. And if you scroll forward to about page 8, I think it is, you will see my photo, the Sachin photo. Here it is, top 6. If you're an Indian fan and you like that photo, teach me how to do one of those what's it called again? NFTs?
Non-fungible token.
Non-fungible token. If you're an expert in non-fungible tokens, you can help me turn that photo into a bob or two. Be my guest. But we're not talking about photos. We're talking about this magazine, Jeff. And Liam Livingstone is on the front. For he has had a big summer in white ball cricket.
He's non-fungible. He can't be funged. Liam Livingstone, they describe him as the smash hit of the summer, not the feel-good hit of the summer, but the smash hit of the summer, non-Queens of the Stone Age style. He had a headline-grabbing season, that's what WCM say, featuring some scarcely believable shot-making, and now has the chance to make his name on the world stage. So that's what the interview with him is about, with James Wallace, about his whirlwind 6 weeks, the T20 World Cup coming up, and whether he can make it in Test cricket, which he thinks he can, while still being himself. He says, whatever people say or might think about me, I'm not going to change my attitude, as it has got me to where I am today.
Yeah, that's certainly one way of seeing the world. Andrew Miller draws parallels between the current England Test team and the chaos of the 90s. They're looking at Joe Root's rise back to the top of the world rankings in the India series. Lisa Keightley had a chat with magazine editor Joe Harmon about her first 2 years coaching England. Can you believe it's been 2 years since Lisa Keightley took over that job? Also interviews with Javed Miandad, Alice Capsey, who'll be making her international debut soon enough. There's the county files. All 18 counties are looked after in each edition of the magazine. There's an interview with Nick Gubbins in there, who's just signed with Hampshire, for example. Lizzie Ammons looking into whether the conference system's going to stay in county cricket. We might talk about that a little bit later in the show. We've got a very punchy editor's letter as well, Jeff. I'm not sure if you've read it yet, from Phil Walker, called A Very British Scandal. And yes, that's worth a read around the bonuses that some some members of the ECB were able to collect for their work, which was a story that was broken by Ali Martin a couple of weeks ago, and Phil wrote about that at great length. And Jeff, the only other main point to note here is that it was Wisden.com, which is a partner of Wisden Cricket Monthly, who first broke the Azim Rafiq story. So they've had quite a bit to say in the magazine this month via Lawrence Booth, the editor of the Almanac, how cricket has a long way to go in terms of tackling racism.
Yeah, plenty more to come in terms of interviews and so on as well. There's the Iconography of Cricket series where Phil's picking out great images from the past. There's Andy Zaltzman on the significance of the number 99. It's all happening. But look, the thing is that you can get this magazine for 44% off. I don't know why 44, but that's the number. 44 off a 6-month subscription by using the link that we give you. It's in the show notes, so you don't need to remember it. But if you're typing it into the bar right now, it's a bit.ly thing, so bit.ly/WCMTFW. Wisden Cricket Monthly, the final word. That's what that means. 44% off, best cricket mag in the world. Nice and easy, 6-month subscription for like, I don't know, 10 quid, $15 for the 6 months. Ridiculous. Go and get it.
Definitely go and get it. It's a wonderful publication. I should have noted the fact that, I'll tell you on YouTube, my column returns to the magazine next month as well. There you go.
Now, this is the final word. Jeff Lemon, Adam Collins, and as we foreshadowed off the top of the show, the news about England pulling out of Pakistan came in live while we were recording last week, so we did mention it, but we didn't have time to get into all of it. We've covered off what it means for Pakistan to be screwed over, in that we talked about that in relation to New Zealand, what the potential ramifications will be for Pakistan cricket, with other countries having much more pretext to pull out now. But a lot more came to light over the few days that followed. Initially to do with the ECB's press release that implied, didn't say it directly or specifically, but it was cleverly worded to imply that they were pulling out of this tour for player welfare, because players would be concerned about touring there after a very difficult summer with lots of COVID and isolation protocols and all of the rest. As it turns out, they didn't talk to the players at all. Heather Knight confirmed that. No player input was sought before the decision was made, and the decision was made unilaterally by the ECB with whatever advice they got to pull out. And so it's come to seem like a far less altruistic position, more than a position of, it will be convenient to not have to do this tour, and this is a way that we can get out of doing it. Bearing in mind the whole tour was supposed to last 4 days, was it? That they were going to get in, quarantine for a couple of days, play a couple of T20s back-to-back, and then fly out. Yeah, look,
I'll add a bit of meat to the bones on this. So, first of all, when we talked about the domino effect last week, I didn't think it would be so crude as this. I mean, when we read the statement, almost straight into the podcast, it took me a couple of read-throughs to understand what they were saying, which was exactly that it was about the men's team and their preparation for the T20 World Cup, about not being ideal to have to go to Pakistan. Because no one's answered questions about this in a meaningful way, because we've not seen Tom Harrison or heard from Ian Watmore, Mike Atherton's been banging away and doing a great job making this case in the Times each day. It does lend itself to speculation, wild or otherwise. To what extent did players get consulted? Unclear. But I'd love to know, was this because they said to Owen Morgan, who's a very powerful man, maybe you just fancy staying at the IPL? And he goes, actually, yeah, I would fancy staying at the IPL. Yeah, probably better for us to stay at the IPL, actually. Yeah, let's do that. Did they spend 72 hours preparing a response rather than 24 to 48, the original time frame, because they were shopping for security advice to back in what New Zealand had said? Well, that would have been a much better fig leaf. We expected, Jeff, didn't we, when we recorded last week, that New Zealand started all of this, or the decision made by the New Zealand Cricket Board alongside their government, that it would start there, and the security concerns would be cited by the ECB if they were going to pull out, and in turn by CA, and then Pakistan would be fucked. In the end, this has had nothing to do with that. It is the one thing missing in the statement, and that was reinforced by the High Commissioner, his intervention, Christian Turner, who said there has been no amendment in the advice given to British nationals coming to Pakistan. There is no change in the situation. He was clearly gutted at the ECB's decision. As to the players and what it means, so they talk of the men's World Cup preparation. And look, if you step back from it objectively, is it ideal that they'd have to do sort of a helicopter tour for 5 days and come out again and leave the IPL? Maybe not, but not every decision has to be in the best interest of every decision can't be about your own self-interest. It has to be about the good of the game at some level. And what about the interest of the women's team? They don't talk about the Women's World Cup. The women don't play a 50-over game. Their last one was Sunday, the 26th of September. Their next one is in February against Australia. These are the only other 3 games they had penciled in for the next 5 months. Where was the mention of their World Cup preparation? They weren't just playing the T20s. They were playing one-dayers and sticking around for them as well. So I get why Pakistan, and what about the Pakistan women? I mean, it's all good and well to think about this as the male prism, but the Pakistan women's team, they are denied the opportunity to host cricket over there. I get when Ramiz Raja says they've learnt a lesson, basically saying we gave so much last year and we've learnt a lesson not to fucking trust anybody. I agree with him. If you are Ramiz Raja right now, as the new chair of the PCB, you have every right to feel gutted because this has nothing to do with security. It has everything to do with the fact that they can't be asked and they've been given a fig leaf via NZC and they may not have the security advice to back that in, but this is the outcome that they were clearly steering towards, and they may not have gotten away with it without New Zealand, but as soon as that happened, they grasped the opportunity. And here we are. And where does that leave Pakistan? And I'll build on this when I speak in a moment. Where does it leave the global game?
When we look at how this started out, I think last week we were broadly supportive of New Zealand cricket, saying, well, if they'd got an adverse security assessment, then what could they do? And I think the fact that they were there, it's not like they pulled out before they went. They were in the country, they were ready to play, and they pulled out at the very last minute, does indicate that they got something serious enough and specific enough to pull out. But additionally, as has been pointed out, why didn't they share that information with anybody in Pakistan? If there was a target to the New Zealand cricket team who then left, then presumably that target might be pointed elsewhere. People in Pakistan would have been at risk if there was a legitimate threat. So, A, what was going on with that? And then B, with England apparently not being able to stand up the idea that there was a security reason not to go, it was basically the concept that touring there while people would be nervous about touring there was too hard an ask of their players. And a lot has been asked of players, a huge amount has been asked of players. But when we look at what was asked of Pakistan's players, and it's important to go back to this, at the point that Pakistan went to England last year, COVID was exploding in England, far worse than it was in Pakistan at that point. There was no vaccine. There was no reliable treatment. The hospital system was being overwhelmed in the UK. It required months in the very tightest security bubble. And they were willing to do all of that on the expectation that they would be looked after by England at some point in the future. England could have sent, if there were players who didn't want to go, if Owen Morgan didn't want to go, as he didn't want to go to Bangladesh in 2015. 2015 was it, or was it earlier?
It might have been 2016, but you're right. Yeah, Morgan was one of the 2 players who pulled out of that tour.
If he didn't want to go, fine, send somebody else. Let someone else captain the side. Maybe Alex Hales gets a game. I don't know. But there was, I think there would still have been criticism had they sent what would have been regarded as a second string squad, had a bunch of the top players not gone or the IPL players not gone. But it still would have got a match on in Pakistan. It still would have enabled Pakistan home supporters to see a game of cricket featuring an England side, and it would still have kept that momentum and goodwill going towards Pakistan to try to help the game start again in that country. Like, there've been such positive strides over the last couple of years. There's obviously a huge setback with the turmoil in Afghanistan, and who knows what the repercussions of that will be, the sort of ripple effect through Pakistan. But you can really only go with what's in front of you, which is that at the moment it has been secure enough for teams to tour. And if there wasn't a security reason for England to bail, then what they've done seems... It's very much about their convenience. It's very much about it's 9 p.m, you were supposed to meet someone somewhere at 7, but you're pretty tired and you're really not feeling up for it. And so you're like, I feel a bit sick. Might send a text. I've just come down with something. 24-hour bug. Won't be able to make it. Sorry.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, and look, the players are knackered. The women and the men, in different ways. I mentioned the women's season in our first segment and how that's been more compressed and, well, not compressed, but there's been more cricket than they've experienced in a domestic season before. And the men have been bouncing between formats. Of course, a number of them had to self-isolate when COVID got into the camp. Some of them have had... I get all of that, but there's a reciprocity here. And as you say, Jeff, Pakistan and the West Indies got England out of a 300 million quid hole last year. Yeah, they still recorded a loss of 100 million quid, I think it was. But still, that hole was filled in no small part by the fact that these two teams came out here and there was an expectation that the favour would be returned. And yes, it is more important that it's England. It is more... I don't... You can debate whether it should or shouldn't be. England going back there... it shouldn't be more important than South Africa going there and the West Indies going there and Sri Lanka going there and Bangladesh going there and others, Zimbabwe. But it would have been seen as an important step. It would have been. It would have been a great price signal, if you like, to the rest of the market that if it's good enough for England, even for 3 T20s, then there should be no security concerns into the future for countries like Australia who are reluctant tourists at the best of times. So there was a very balanced view last week, Jeff, I think, around our conversation and others around, well, if there's a real and present threat that's taken New Zealand from their hotel to the airport and out of the country on the day of the first one-dayer, okay, that's a bloody awful thing to happen, and it does potentially set off a chain reaction, but you have to take them on good faith. The ECB have eliminated that good faith, then they have failed to answer questions about it. I think the PCA have questions to answer as well. I'm not putting them in the middle of all of this, but if people are pointing at the Players Association, I'd love to know what they have to say about this and their input to the ECB through this process. I want to know which players were consulted. Heather Knight, as she said on commentary the other day, wasn't. Were any of the other women senior players consulted on the way through? Or was it just a shit, actually, fuck, the men aren't going, okay, we have to cancel the women's tour as well. Certainly feels that way to me. And look, if the women had different reasons for not wanting to visit, I don't know this to be the case, but let's say the women did feel a bit uneasy about going to Pakistan at the moment because of what's going on, and they felt they might be more vulnerable than the men. Okay, that's fine. Let's have that conversation. But leaving it all up in the air and leaving so many questions unanswered does lend itself to wild speculation, and it does bolster the argument that, say, Mark Butcher has been advancing, that player power has shifted this to a place where they are tail wagging dog sort of situation when it should be the ECB displaying leadership in this space. I mentioned. Before.
But it could equally, if it comes down to player power, it can equally be a situation like we saw with Australia going to the Caribbean a couple of months ago where, okay, 7 or 8 of the big names don't go.
Exactly.
That means there are other players who could go. Tell me that someone like your second string England team that played Pakistan earlier in the summer when they got COVID, the first team got COVIDed out. Tell me that the John Simpson tier of players... Well,
they're not at the IPL. That tier of player is not at the IPL. And you can't tell me that isn't part of the subliminal thinking here. They're all at the IPL. Not all of them, sorry. They're not all a number of them are at the IPL. Can they really be fucked moving from the IPL to Pakistan for 5 days? I get it's an inconvenience, but a lot of things you have to do in life or as an employee are inconvenient. This is not the same as the conversation that's going on around the England team and the Ashes. It is a discrete, separate instance. It shouldn't be conflated. Yes, there's a degree of player power that we'll return to with the Ashes in a moment, but this is a situation where they've made the decision not to rock up, and it has nothing to do with security. And I wonder whether, Jeff, we're going to turn around in 10 years' time and we're going to point at this moment. We're going to go... This was when, there was the India example recently where they exerted their authority over England, at Manchester. There was Australia with South Africa. There was England with South Africa. There'll be other instances which I can't think of from the top of my head, but where boards have basically shown who is the stronger of the two. I wonder whether we look back in 10 years' time with a ruinous World Test Championship, with bilateral tours being a take it or leave it proposition, with any number of spurious arguments being used to not tour to play Test cricket, and this might be where we go, this was the sort of thing which changed the thinking around what players and what boards had to do what their obligations were, and whether we live in a very different world in terms of bilateral cricket because of moments in time like this. This isn't about Test cricket this week. It's about the England T20 team specifically, but whether it will have wider and broader implications, and this will hurt the game badly in the medium to long term. I can't see.
Do you think that's because teams will disengage with one another, that the teams that are likely to be screwed about won't be reciprocating, they won't be touring the other countries?
I just think if you're Australia now, why would you go to Pakistan? Why if you're one of the big three right now, why would you go anywhere? Why would you bother? What's the point? Not making any money out of it. Next year, Australia could avoid going to Pakistan. Their players can go to the IPL in a World Cup year. They'll be able to get away with hypothecated points for the World Test Championship. Everyone else did. They'll be able to find a way through that. I'm sure that they can find some fig leaf there. And who even knows what the World Test Championship will look like in the future? So I'm simply putting that once you turn bilateral series into a take it or leave it kind of thing, and you don't have COVID to lean on, and you don't have security to lean on, that maybe this becomes a far worse world. And the question has been club and country, which is often a football conversation. What do you value more, playing for your club or playing for your country? That's never really been part of it with cricket, with some notable exceptions. The country has come first. Now, and I'm not saying it's an IPL thing here, not at all.
The country has always been, up until recently, the main economic driver. Playing for your country is where you get paid, but I think even now, playing for your country is where you develop a reputation that makes you saleable in the T20 freelance market.
Yes.
So it's easy to say every player just wants to go and play T20 franchise cricket instead, but in order to get that reputation, aside from a few examples who it is starting to shift with your sort of players like Rashid Khan and Sandeep Lamichhane and so on, but for the most part, most players who fetch a big price in T20 cricket do so because of what they've done in international cricket.
Yeah, and you sort of my close. This is shameless from the decision makers here. I mean, it is an awful thing to do to the PCB, an awful thing to do to cricket in Pakistan. It could have wide-reaching repercussions for that country because their players are knackered. Why are their players knackered? It's not because of the fucking PCB. It's not the fault of Pakistan cricket. Look at the Pakistan women. What they've gone through to have an international team in the last 25 years. They're building towards a World Cup as well. Now they don't get that opportunity to play against England, who are the defending champs in their own backyard. I mean, this is bad stuff. This is bad stuff, and it should be, and they should have to answer questions about it. And you can't divorce it either from the conversation around Moeen Ali, who's just retired from Test cricket today. Now, I'm not saying Moeen's retired to it's because he for the same reasons his tour has been cancelled, but it is broadly all part of the same conversation, isn't it? Around what individuals inside the game are willing to subject themselves to, and in Moeen's case, he's acknowledged that the quarantine around the Ashes was probably what may have been the final straw, a decision he was weighing up during the India series when he's gone from being out of the team into the team, vice captain, and retiring all in the space of about 6 whirlwind weeks.
Yeah, it's a crazy few weeks in the end, I suppose, and it felt like too little too late from England when they popped him into the vice captain's job. It was a way of saying, oh, look, we've screwed you around massively this year, which they had, getting him out to Sri Lanka where he gets COVID and then he's in quarantine and then he can't play those tests, and then they don't pick him in the first test in India, but they do pick him in the second, and then put the hard word on him to stay when he's supposed to go home to see his family for a brief window of time, and sort of make it out to be his fault that he's decided to go home in the middle of a test series and abandon England, when in reality he'd spent 8 weeks in a hotel room by that point for the sake of playing one test match, and then get him to come back for the T20 series in which he doesn't play, sits on the bench for 5 matches, having come back out to India again. I mean, it's insane what they did with Moeen Ali just this year, as opposed to the many years leading up of bouncing him around the order sort of everywhere from 1 to 9 that he's batted, having him be their strike spin bowler and then not their supporting spinner, and then having him in and out of the side, and there's very rarely been any clarity for Moeen about what he's supposed to do in his career. And despite that, he's still managed to play 64 tests, be England's third highest wicket taker as far as spinners go, and make nearly 3,000 runs, or just over 3,000 runs. So, just short, wasn't he, in the end? So
just short.
Extraordinary sort of career that he's managed to piece together out of all the bits and pieces. But you can see why in the end he would look at how erratic his treatment have been, how keen Chris Silverwood has been not to pick a spinner at all in his test side, and would think, well, why bother going out to Australia where there's a good chance we get fucking hammered again, and it's a pretty miserable tour for the sake of having that experience and having to spend however many weeks in quarantine for the privilege.
Yeah, a lot of this happened in Australia in 17-18, where it sort of the story started to change for Moeen as a Test cricketer. Had a brilliant 2017, just dominated with the ball, especially against South Africa. But took his wickets at 115 in that Ashes series, and Nathan Lyon got him out 7 times, and it was all so daunting and overwhelming for him. I remember watching him bowl at the Wacker and just thinking, geez, this guy's cooked. And that was the same at Edgbaston in 2019 on that fourth day when Steve Smith and Matthew Wade and others just tore him apart. And he was out of the team, then out of cricket altogether, took a break to tend to his mental health after that. And that was part of the conversation in the last couple of years.
Asked for a break and then immediately lost his Test contract.
That's right. The contract
a month later.
Yeah, when Joe Root spoke to this yesterday, he was surprised that Moeen left the team or left Test cricket so quickly after becoming vice captain, but kind of acknowledged that he could have been handled better. And that's Joe Root, by the way. I mean, Joe Root's not one to... he's a good guy, Root, and he's willing to cop a whack when there's a whack to be had, and he would know in his heart of hearts that through the span that he's been captain, things haven't been managed with Moeen as well as they might be. And still, in a wonderful.
Joe Root's not deciding who gets a contract. He's not running central contracts.
No, whilst that's true, I think that what you went through before, that sort of inconsistency of purpose with him. Where does he fit in? Was unclear at different points, far more so in the last 3 or 4 years than it was in the first 3 or 4 years of his Test career, where he started so well. I think back in 2016, some of those hundreds he made, and the way he bowled in 2017, to finish as only one of 13 players to take 5 fifers and 5 centuries. I mean, it's a brilliant list of cricketers, all-rounders that he joins, even though he averaged 28 with the bat and 36 with the ball, and people will say, well, look, if those numbers were reversed, then maybe he could be considered a great all-rounder. But still, he made a big contribution. I wonder what happens next for him. Presumably he goes on to have a stellar domestic white ball career. He's playing in the IPL at the moment. He'll have a T20 World Cup later this year and another one the year after, where he'll be Root's deputy, maybe even leading the team if they're doing a squad. No, not Root, sorry. He's the deputy of Owen Morgan, of course. But at different times with squad rotation and injuries, he's led England in the last couple of years. He didn't play in the 50-over World Cup final in 2019. I'm sure that grates that he was dropped from the squad after the Sri Lanka game and missed the pointy end of that competition at home. So that'll be on the horizon for him in a couple of years too in India. So plenty of time to go in the Moeen Ali story, despite the fact that he's 34 years of age. And Vish made a good point in his piece too, that this is a strong, proud Muslim man, having his international career coincide with a surge of Islamophobia in this country around Brexit, especially in 2016 and that campaign and beyond. So it's not always been the easiest time for him to play for his country, and yet he's always done so with a smile on his face, and the kind of guy who has brought many, many people into the sport and should be credited for that, and looking forward to seeing what he can now do with the white ball.
Go well, Moeen. Thanks for the entertainment. The rest of the England players broadly seem like maybe they're happy with the Ashes deal, in that they've negotiated this thing with Queensland where they'll have the sort of resort quarantine that we have talked about in the previous couple of weeks. They'll be able to get out to train for a few hours a day, so it won't be staring at the hotel room wall for 2 weeks. The partners and kids will get the same treatment as long as they come out at around the same time. But that means they have to start in Queensland. That's where they've got this arrangement, which is interesting given that New South Wales are trialling 7-day home quarantine for vaccinated people by October, I think. So, there would be a chance, you'd imagine, for England players coming in at the end of November or even early December that, if they were coming into New South Wales or maybe Victoria by that point, it might be easier to come into the country still. But look, maybe things will be a bit more relaxed in Queensland by then, beyond what they're expecting at this point, but they've at least worked out something that is acceptable by today's standards, with today's vax rates and infection rates and all of that, that will be carried forward to when they arrive.
Yeah, I think the fact that there's been a lot of information relayed to the England team in the last 3 or 4 days has helped the situation. I mean, it was a fairly clear message coming out of the England team that they were so anxious because they had no clue what was going to happen to them. Resort quarantine, the fact that their families will get that when they arrive, be it with the team or later on, is all going to be part of this. I'm not sure. Well, I'm certain that Boris Johnson's conversation with Scott Morrison was obviously done to be able to say it was done. It was never going to achieve anything, but it has had had the effect of getting it more on the news list of or the front of the paper rather than the back of the paper, shall we say, through the middle part of last week. And there was a story from Nick Holt in the Telegraph on Friday saying that we're on the cusp of mass withdrawals, and it feels like the weekend that's been disaster averted because of the quarantine arrangements. However, it doesn't fix the timing problem that we went through in great depth the other week, whereby families are going to be coming out much later, who have school-age kids will be coming out much later, and they still won't get to see. The families will not be together. I know that there's now figures like Michael Vaughan saying that they should just make a collective decision to do it and go ahead and get on with it. And I get where he's coming from with that, because the longer this drags out, the more uncertainty there is, the harder it is to kind of stick the landing and all the rest of it. But I still think that when you fold into this the conversation around the Perth Test match, so the fact that Perth is so locked up and so boarded up, people in England still get to see the pictures of people at the Shrine of Remembrance on the Westgate Bridge. There's a feeling over here, justified or otherwise, and let's say it's unjustified based on the vaccine rate, that there are a shitload of anti-vaxxers out here in Australia who are going to jeopardise the whole fucking thing. And I get that. They see the news. I mean, the forecasts are quite positive, but forecasts are one thing. What they can see with their own eyes is another. And the fact that Perth is considered to be a dungeon of sorts when it comes to getting in or getting out, and will remain that way till February. And we saw during the week Christina Matthews saying that the Ashes need to get to Perth before Melbourne and Sydney, which to me, Jeff, felt like after the grand final and the success of the grand final on the weekend, a fairly sort of brazen attempt to get the Boxing Day Test match. And again, I hate this state-by-state parochial shit. That was direct.
I mean, that was explicit. She specifically said, we've had the AFL Grand Final, so why shouldn't we have the Boxing Day Test? I will make the point that everybody who went to Perth for the AFL Grand Final to work on it, to make it happen, all of the media, all of the AFL management and so on, had to do 2 weeks in hotel quarantine.
Yep. It
is not sustainable to ask people coming into your state to do that coming from other states if you want to put an event on. That doesn't mean you deserve to put an event on. That means you don't. That means it should be somewhere that's more manageable. All of these England players have to do 2 weeks coming into the country. Okay, fine. That's one thing. But to expect them to do it again to get into Perth is lunacy. And I mean, it's likely to happen with cases. If a handful of cases in Queensland now, what's the bet that within a couple of days the WA border shuts to Queensland, which it hasn't been before now. So I think Perth, WA has all but written themselves out of it, just as they did last summer, and can't really be sore about that because it's going to be too difficult. Whereas there will be some ability to move by then between Melbourne, Sydney, Adelaide, and look, if Brisbane find themselves in the same boat over the next few weeks, then they'll be in that general pool as well. Yeah,
well, the problem is that the forecasts have Queensland getting to the magic number of 80% too late to make this work. The whole thing, and we're getting in the weeds a bit here, but based on Dan Brettig's reporting in the Age, the CA are unwilling to budge on the schedule. Like the schedule as it's been announced is the one thing they won't pivot on. I mean, we went through in great depth a couple of weeks ago. If they move it back a couple of weeks or 3 weeks and they started in Melbourne or started in Sydney, they can pull this off. But they won't because, people can't be fucked thinking outside the square on this stuff. And the schedule's a schedule and, we'd have to resell ads and, it competes against the tennis and all that sort of shit. But if it means getting everyone in and getting the whole thing on the road a little bit later, just to buy some precious time, and having the Brisbane test, and which, by the way, it's not cricket's fault. You said before that WA's made a decision to behave in this way and take these government decisions. It's also not the fault of of the sport, that the vaccine rates are lower in some states compared to others. I mean, at the end of the day, cricket can't be held hostage to the fact that Queensland's going to get to 80% a month and a half after New South Wales. That's not cricket's fault.
And it's not the WACA's fault that their state government will make it difficult for people to get into the state, even when they're extremely low-risk people, and there could be some sort of accommodation worked out that maintains the health system while, not derailing the entire competition. But there's basically no way out of this, because if you want to bring the Perth test earlier, as they're suggesting, it can't be the first test because all the players are arriving in Queensland. So presumably, if there's difficulty getting from Queensland to Perth, it'll still exist. So if you make it the second test, that doesn't guarantee that those players will be able to get from Queensland to Perth, because that border could be closed by then. And you can't make it the third test because that's Boxing Day, and we will presumably be able to have people at the MCG in Melbourne, vaccinated people attending that game by the 26th of December. So it's not going to be Boxing Day and it's not going to be New Year's. Those two things aren't going to move. The only thing it could be would be the first or the second. Can't be the second because of the likelihood or the possibility of the border closing. Can't be the first because of where they're arriving. So there's just no way around it unless the WA government were willing to be a little bit more accommodating to try to help the thing go ahead. Yeah,
it should be the first. If they're going to stick to the schedule, Perth should... I mean, again, it's like rewarding bad behaviour, isn't it? But you almost got to make it the first, and the WA government have to give them the same arrangements as Queensland. But yeah, it's not going to happen, is it? It's a moot point. Which they won't. Exactly, they won't. So it's all ending up in a scenario where Perth miss out on an Ashes test, and it goes, according to reports, to Monaco or Hobart. And you know what? They would both do a stellar job. The experience, Jeff, we had in Canberra a couple of years ago was first class at a wonderful venue. They put on a great show. Every time we've been there, Jeff, for international cricket, they've done a stellar job. And the same applies to Bellerive, who get a bad rap from people who don't like how close it is to Antarctica and stuff like that. And, when playing test matches in November, whilst that might be true, that it can be chilly there, it's not a concern in January, which is when
let
it would
it
be.
have the fifth test. Let it
be
in the middle of January. That's the one time. That's the time you want to be down there.
That's the time. And it also...
have a test in Hobart there.
But also, I mean, it would be probably a once-in-a-lifetime occurrence, an Ashes test match in Hobart. They've never had one before. They would sell it out every day. So it's not going to be like when the Windies were here in 2015, their most recent test match.
It was 6 degrees when play started in the morning, and it was the start of November. Yeah, I mean, it was...
it was just poorly... It was never going to happen, right? They were never going to get great crowds to that, whereas this they can. So if we end up in Hobart or we end up in Canberra, so be it, if that's what it takes. Jeff, in terms of the domestic game around the country, staying with England to begin, I'll give you an updated score from the Bob Willis Trophy, shall I? I had a look before. Lancashire are 57 for 8.
Ooh.
Well, I've been getting messages saying that there's going to be abandonment with Luke Wood, but that's not going to happen. He's 31, not out from 50, out of 57, so he's above 50%. Luke Wood, but it's unlikely he's going to abandonment it from eight wickets down.
He's not out. He could do it. He just needs to smack a few.
Yeah, maybe I should be paying a closer attention to that Bannerman prospect. But the reason why Lancashire are there, because they qualified via coming second in the county championship. If you're in Australia listening to this, you might be like, why are they playing a Lord's final for a different competition the week after the season finished? Good question. I think they should fix that next year, and I'll come to how in a moment. But the championship proper, what a cracking final week it was. It's kind of everything you dream for in a league setup, with 3 games all having an effect on who could win. 2 of those teams playing each other at an outground in Liverpool, so there were people fucking everywhere. Warwickshire having to do it on the final day. Notts were in there fighting for a day or so as well. And Hampshire losing a game. At one stage, they had Lancashire 47 for 7 in their first innings, and all they needed to do was win to win the title, and they couldn't get it done. They lost by 1 wicket in a thrilling clash there. Dane Villar sweeping Lancashire to victory, the captain. But this is the stuff you dream of as a county fan, having it all come down to the final day.
Well, they had a whole day because Lancashire won on day 3, right?
Yeah.
So they had a day where they were top, and they were like, we're going to win this thing. as long as this other mob don't win their game, which at that stage was about, I don't know, 700 for 4 or something. So
no, the other game was the one where, the other game, that's the Surrey game. But the game you're referring to...
I'm exaggerating for effect, but I'm saying it was a game that didn't look like there was going to be a result at that. So
That's
the Warwickshire game by day 3, I was thinking they're probably going to draw this, and as it turned out, they didn't.
Yeah, so Warwickshire were 157 runs ahead going into the 4th day, albeit I think they were 1 down. And they had to kind of execute it perfectly with the declaration, enough time to bowl them out, this being Somerset. And they did it so well. They smashed 100 in an hour, gave themselves, I think, 79 overs to bowl out Somerset. In the end, they did it easily in about 40 overs, bowling them out for 154 and winning by 118 runs. Some big highlights from Chris Woke hitting the stumps. The ball to Craig Overton's the stuff you dream of. Likewise to Jack Leach later on. Liam Norwell, Craig Miles, Tim Bresnam, Danny Briggs, all had a say with the ball as well for the home side. And yeah, they win the title for the first time in 9 years, having started the round in second spot. They leapfrog Hampshire, who go below Lancs, and thus why Warwickshire are playing Lancs in the final of this new competition, which last year was kind of with all on the line. They're not being a county championship, but this year is it's just a one-off game for a cup, but they're playing it over 5 days, in theory at least, at Lords.
It's the Community Shield of county cricket.
Well, this is it. I think that
at the start of each football season, the first 2 from the previous season play off, right?
This is my fix. I think it's the FA Cup winner and the Premier League winner, but this is my fix for next year. You should make the Bob Willis Trophy final the curtain raiser on the season. So the team that finished first and second the previous year, then they should play at Lords to start the fresh season. Wouldn't that be a great event? How much attention would there be if this was kicking off? Yes, it would be April, and yes, it would be cold, but I'll tell you what, it's cold in the last week of September and the start of October as well. So whether it's at the very end or the very start, it's going to be cold at Lords. Small price to pay to have a big set piece, showpiece event to start the year.
I've thought about the Community Shield quite a bit in the last few months, because when they announced the Football Super League thing, when all the big clubs were going to go in together and form a fuck you to everybody else league, and they listed all of the accomplishments of the clubs on the website for this thing. They were like, Manchester United, winners of Champions League in all of these years, blah, blah, blah. Real Madrid, Champions League, 10 Champions League wins in the last 30 years or whatever. And then they were like, Tottenham Hotspur, Community Shield, 1992. You're gonna have some very angry Tottenham fans, including the co-host of the Wisden Cricket podcast, Phil Walker.
You
can't fight me on it. It's true. That's what it said. I'm just reporting the facts, people.
Jeff, for the second time in 2021, the Shield is overlapping with the Championship, or it did overlap last weekend. So Andrew Sampson worked out that it was the first time ever back in April with the Shield ending so late because of COVID. Well, this time around, the Shield started in September. Let's start with the news, which is that we touched on it before, but Tasmania have pulled out of their game in Queensland this week because of COVID. Those 3 COVID cases in Brisbane. 3 COVID cases. Bloody hell. And I get it, but still.
Presumably the thinking is the Tassie border could shut at any minute, and so
no, of course,
get in before it happens.
No, I totally get the rationale, but it just seems so weird as someone living in London for the last 19 months that 3 COVID cases. I've had 3 COVID cases this week, Tassie have pulled out. So the game they did get up was at Adelaide at Karen Rolton Oval between West Australia and the Sackers. WA made 465 for 9. Sean Marsh 118, Cameron Green 106.
Here he goes.
Marsh has now made 6 first-class tons since the start of 1920. He's won the Player of the Year twice in the One Day Cup. He's into his 21st year with Western Australia. He's 38 years old. He's now made 32 tons. We've said it before. We'll say it again. There's a gap in the middle order at number 5. It's not too late.
It's coming home. It's coming. Sean Marsh is coming home. It's coming.
At the other end of his career is Cameron Green, who's now made. You love the conversion rate, don't you? 8 centuries at first class level. That 106 against SA, and only 4 half centuries. So he's averaging 56, and he's 22 years of age. Well, yeah,
he was 10 and 5 in Test cricket.
Well, he's going to be batting number 6 for Australia in the Ashes. That's absolutely certain. I've got a quiz question for you, Jeff, and I don't know the answer to it. which I'm quite excited about. Who batted number 5 for Australia at Sydney and Brisbane?
In last summer?
I asked that question because I was thinking about Travis Head, who was dropped after Melbourne, made 100 in reply for South Australia, 163 out of 492. Just like last year, he made 2 150s to start the year. This time last year, Jake Carter was the other man in the runs, the 25-year-old left-hander who came via WA. But I didn't want to look it up. I just wanted to ask you, do you remember, off the top of your head, who batted 5 for Australia at Sydney and Brisbane? Because I can't.
Wasn't Head batting 5 at that point?
No, they dropped him.
Oh,
they dropped him after Melbourne.
Yes, and Green was 6.
Green batted 6.
That's a very good question.
I mean, it's not as though we're not informed people on the gap. We were there. I mean, I've covered every Australian Test match for 6 years. I mean, I have an idea what's going on. But off the top of my head, I haven't got a fucking clue who batted 5 for Australia when they dropped Travis Head after Melbourne.
Wait.
We can probably work it out. I mean, Perkovsky opened at Sydney. Marcus Harris opened at Brisbane. Who came in to bat number 5 when Travis Head dropped out?
Mitchell Marsh didn't come in, did he?
Mitchell Marsh didn't come in.
And Hanscom was gone. And why can't I remember this? He probably didn't make any runs.
It wasn't the King, Alex Carey, who made runs in the one-day team this week. He was set to bat 5 in South Africa.
Well, it was Wade, wasn't it?
You're probably right.
Wade went to 5 because he opened at the MCG. Wade opened at the MCG, and then he went back down the order in Sydney.
Well, there it is. You've got it. We've got it. It has to be Wade, right? But the point here is that it's been so long since Australia has played, and so they are so off the map in terms of Test cricket that doesn't come instinctive to either of us. It just took us 5 minutes to work it out. But Travis Head was the incumbent number 5 before his season fell off a cliff last year, and he's making runs. I suppose they would want him to be the 5.
He got dropped when Perkovsky came in because Wade went down.
Right, there you go.
Someone had to make space for Wade, who'd been doing a job for the boys by opening the batting.
Do you think Head's the player they want to bat 5 in the Ashes?
I think he's the player they want to bat 5 eventually. It's whether they think he's going to be ready to do it in the Ashes.
If not Head, then who?
Shaun Marsh.
I don't know. The thing is, usually I'd give you an answer on this. I've got a fucking clue. Alex Carey?
Give Maxi a bat.
Well, I'd bring Maxi in, but we're not gonna.
Hashtag give Maxi a bat. Hashtag inspired by HCL.
Ryan Philippe made 100 in the white ball game. Mitch Marsh made 1 as well. They made 352 for 6. Then the King made 128 not out. Carrying his bat for South Australia, Carey. Did you see that? Made 128 not out at a 237 all out. Not often that you carry a bat in a one-dayer. Jason Berendorf must be back from his latest back injury. Took 4 for 39. There was going to be a one-dayer between Queensland and Tassie as well, but that's called off because of the aforementioned COVID shambles. And to finish off in that conversation, it was a high-scoring draw at Karen Rolton. I think all first-class games at Karen Rolton are high-scoring draws on the available evidence.
In tribute to Karen herself, who was always high-scoring.
So that's the end of round 1 of the Shield, which totalled 1 game.
Can I tell you a great fact about Josh Philippe, who we call Ryan Philippe on this show?
Please.
His middle name is Ryan.
No, stop it. Really?
It is. Yep.
I want to ask him about the making of Cruel Intentions. That must have been such a fun film to make. Yeah.
How did they lace Sarah Michelle Gellar into that corset that looked like it was going to throttle her? Can I tell you another fact that I learned during the week? Another middle name that I learned?
Yeah.
I learned what Maxwell Sheffield's middle name is.
Mr. Sheffield.
Yeah. He has a middle name.
What is it?
The character in the show.
It will be something aristocratic, won't it?
Beverly.
Maxwell Beverly Sheffield. We had a message during the week asking us to start doing the Mr. Sheffield stuff again. So, I suppose that qualifies me saying it then.
It'll be on a shirt. When we get around to making the shirts, the Mr. Sheffield Shield will be foremost.
There's one more domestic competition we need to take a look at before I go and collect my new phone. I'm quite excited about this, Jeff. It's going to be the highlight of my week. Now that I've finished working on 8 broadcast games in 8 days and I can kind of do normal adult grown-up things. I took Winnie to nursery this morning and I'm getting a phone this afternoon. The IPL's on. Maxi made runs, made 56 of them from 37 balls against Mumbai after a couple of low scores to start. That's all what we really care about, I suppose. But other things are happening. David Warner's been dropped.
Took a couple of wickets as well. They lost the game, but he took a couple.
Good on him. I mean,
Yep.
I hope it goes really well for him. Beyond that, I suppose it's after the Lord Mayor show, isn't it? It's the wrong time of year for me to give a fuck. I am not in the mood. I'm going to Greece next week, and sorry, that probably sounds quite indulgent for the many of you who are in lockdown at the moment. But sorry, I didn't mean it to come across that way. But yes, this is my.
You literally haven't taken a day off work in about 6 years, so I for one am relieved that you're going on a holiday.
Warner has been dropped by the Sunrisers of Hyderabad, and Steve Smith can't get a game at Delhi. Punter won't pick him.
Sunset,
and then Marcus Stoinis has done his fucking hammy.
Oh.
I don't know if you saw that, but that's a bit of a problem with the T20 World Cup, which will probably include Smith, Warner, Stoinis. One's injured and two aren't playing.
Just some beautiful selection work from Australia once again. They always get it right when it comes to a T20 World Cup.
Nathan Ellis going okay. Josh Hazlewood going okay. But my sense is that this isn't going well.
I'm gonna put one thing out there, which is that when they picked the squad, I don't think they were relying on Nathan Ellis to play a central role.
No.
I don't think they saw him as one of the pillars. I think they saw him as a bit of a fresco above the pillars, maybe a bit decorative, maybe a little contribution here or there. But if it's not Ellis centred, the Australian campaign.
We'll keep a better eye on the IPL in future weeks, maybe, Jeff. Have you watched any of the games back yet? Since they started the tournament last week? No, it's mostly for me been honestly. It's been because I've been so busy with the other games that I've been doing between.
I've had another game of cricket on every day.
Yeah,
at least one.
If you're watching this on YouTube and you're going, why don't you like the IPL? We did daily shows on the IPL before. We streamed games in the first half of the year. Or watch-alongs. We interviewed Maxi about 10 times. It's not that we have an issue with the IPL. It's just that. It's just not quite working for me this time. It's just not quite the right fit.
It's like Christmas in July, You're like, frankly, I'm not going to put that much effort into Christmas in July because it's not Christmas.
Because there'll be another one in December and there'll be another IPL in April. That's for sure. There'll be another episode of The Final Word that comes up on the weekend to Storytime. Jeff, why don't you wrap this one up?
Yeah, let's do it. And there'll be this episode next week as well. That's what works with a weekly show. That's how it goes. But this has been The Final Word with Jeff Lemon, Adam Collins. Thank you to DC, our editor, who makes it beautiful. It's on the Bad Producer Podcast Network. Thanks to Brick Lane for supporting the show. BrickLaneBrewing.com if you want to get a delicious beverage for yourself or others. And a special thanks to all of the people on Patreon, the lifeblood of the show, the ones who let us keep doing this week in, week out for as long as we are able to make words come out of our mouth about the game. Bless you all. And we will see you again on the weekend for Storytime.
Bye.